So, welcome everyone to our launch of two exciting initiatives. Before we do that, I'd like to call on Sabrina Al-Awad to recite from the Quran and provide a land acknowledgement. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Nazhat. I'll start by reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful, all praises for Allah, Lord of all worlds, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Master of Judgment Day, you alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us along the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not those you are displeased with, or those who are astray. Allahumma ameen. I reside on the Durham region, so I'll be doing the land acknowledgement for Durham region. The region of Durham exists on lands that the Michi-Salgek Anishinaabe inhabited for thousands of years prior to European colonization. These lands are the traditional and treaty territories of the nations covered under the Williams Treaties, including the Misagas of Scogog Island First Nation, Alderville First Nation, Hiawatha First Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, and the Chippewa Nation of Georgina Island, Rama and Biswele First Nation. We honor, recognize, and respect Indigenous peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. And once again, welcome and assalamu alaikum to everyone. It's kind of a gloomy evening here in Takaranto or Toronto, and we're really delighted to have you all with us. We're going to share some very exciting information about new projects, new initiatives that CCMW will be launching. Before we do that, I'd like to introduce myself. I'll be your MC for the evening. My name is Nuzhat Jaffrey. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, and you'll be hearing from some very capable, competent, amazing women who have done a lot of work with us to bring us to this stage today. So, just a few words about why we're doing this. So you'll hear from Sabrine Azrak and you'll hear from Zainab Jamal about each of the initiatives. They'll give you an overview. But, we've been working with Muslim women for many years, or we've been hearing from them, or we've been facilitating discussions around situations where they have encountered challenges, such as domestic violence, family or relationship breakdowns, different kinds of incidents that happen in their lives that really put them in difficult situations. And, there've been policy-related issues, there's been, legislation-related issues, but first and foremost, these things affect the daily lives of Canadian Muslim women. And we've seen how they struggle to access justice, to access affordable legal services. And sometimes those services are not available to them at all. So CCMW decided that, we couldn't sit back any longer. We have been coordinating legal services and support services for survivors of gender-based violence for several years. But that wasn't enough. They couldn't afford lawyers. They couldn't afford to access counselors, therapists. So you'll hear more about what we are going to do to alleviate the restrictions that they face and hopefully enhance their access to justice. So what we'll do now is introduce you to first Sabrine Azrak and then followed by Zainab Jamal. Sabrina Azrak, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction because she's been with us for 10 years, and she has been with CCMW in various capacities. But one of the very first projects that she worked on with us was engaging men and boys to end violence in the family. And ever since then, she's been pursuing a legal career. She coordinated our legal services. She coordinated services and supports for survivors of gender-based violence, and all the while pursuing her law degree. And she did that. Now she is a student at law. She's an articling student with us. And our principal, whom you'll hear from her later on, is Sabah Hazai. And Sabrina is making good progress in learning lots of things. So inshallah, she can be a lawyer with CCMW ultimately. So welcome, Sabrine. And after Sabrine, you'll hear from Zainab Jamal. Zainab has been with us for several years as well. And one of the things I love to share with you is both Sabrine and Zainab really started as our admin assistants. And in fact, Zainab started as a summer student when I first met her. And then she came back to us, and she has been progressing steadily into more responsible positions. And one of the things I can say about Zainab is she has a very wonderful analytical mind. She's extremely well organized. She's very methodical. And for the past several years, she has been managing our Women Who Inspire Awards, our scholarship program, along with different committees of the board. And she also manages our Muslim Women Scholar Series. So she's been very busy with us, but she has proven over and over again her capabilities. So now she's a project manager for our workplace interventions on sexual harassment. And Sabrine, who's been doing much of the legal work at CCMW, will tell you now about CCMW law, followed by Zainab's presentation or words on um, the WISH project. So over to you, Sabrine Azraq, or Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Nazhat. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to a significant and timely initiative called CCMW Law. LAW is an acronym that stands for Legal Advocacy for Women. So CCMW Law represents the culmination of years of CCMW's work, our advocacy, and research to empower Muslim women across Canada. With the generous support of our funders, mainly the Law Foundation of Ontario, the International Development and Relief Foundation, also known as the IDRF, and the Government of Canada, we have established the first ever faith-informed legal clinic for Muslim women by Muslim women in Canada. This clinic is called the Muslim Women's Legal and Community Support Clinic. With this newly established pilot legal clinic, we can now provide direct and free legal services to Muslim women in Ontario in matters surrounding gender-based violence and family law. And this project brings together and brings to life a decades-long vision. And that vision is to offer critical legal support that meets the unique needs of us Muslim women. For those outside of Ontario, our Legal Services Coordination Program is continuously running to ensure that geography is not a barrier to access by continuing to provide legal services coordination to you. We continue at CCMW with our longstanding commitment to legal education, to community engagement, and culturally competent services. We are also launching family law workshops, a gender-based violence awareness campaign, and we are working to integrate much-needed wraparound services, including therapy and counseling, based on the insights from our feasibility study. But CCMW Law is much more than a legal clinic. By improving legal literacy and dismantling systemic barriers, CCMW Law is helping to create a future where Muslim women can more wholly and confidently access justice, God willing. We invite you to take part in this journey, and your support will help transform lives. If you'd like to learn more or get involved, please contact us at law@ccmw.com. Thank you. I'm going to pass it along to my incredible colleague, Zainab Jamad.
Thank you, Sabrine. And I just want to say that CCMW Law has been a dream shared by many of us for a long time. And so now seeing that vision take shape with the clinic is so meaningful for our team and community. We also know that prevention, education, and systematic change are just as important and needed. That's where our next project comes in. I'm honored to introduce you to another important initiative from CCMW, the Workplace Interventions on Sexual Harassment Project, or as we call it, WISH. This project was born out of a troubling reality, one that many of us are all too familiar with. Workplace sexual harassment continues to be a widespread, deeply gendered issue in Canada. It affects far too many women, especially newcomer and immigrant racialized women, who are also confronting and navigating Islamophobia, precarious employment, language barriers, and unfamiliar legal systems. Our national study, Still Overqualified and Underemployed, which we'll link in the chat and is also available on our website for you to read, confirmed what we already knew, and that is many workplaces lack effective, independent reporting mechanisms, and too many Muslim women remain unaware of their rights and the support available to them. That's where WISH comes in. Thanks to the support of Justice Canada, we are leading a 27-month initiative that aims to increase legal literacy and awareness, empower Muslim women with practical tools and resources, and support small and medium-sized employers and organizations in building safer, more inclusive workplaces. Through this project, our team will conduct national surveys with Muslim women and employers to understand the barriers and knowledge gaps that exist. And with that information, we'll create accessible legal education materials in English, French, and 6 additional languages to meet the needs of our communities. These languages are Arabic, Bangla, Pashto, Somali, Farsi, and Urdu. We'll also launch social media campaigns to raise awareness about workplace rights and obligations, and develop training modules and resources for both Muslim women and employers to help them recognize, respond to, and prevent workplace harassment. And beyond that, we're also committed to action. We will train 500 Muslim women across the country and deliver employer-focused sessions to help organizations and employers meet their legal obligations and build cultures of accountability. Our goal with WISH is long-term systematic change. That means improving access to justice, centering lived experiences, and pushing for better policies and protections in workplaces across Canada. We're proud to lead this national initiative and committed to ensuring the resources we create are practical, accessible, and grounded in the realities of our communities. And if you'd like to get involved or learn more, whether you're an employer, employee looking for jobs, between jobs, please reach out to us at info@ccmw.com. I'll also drop my email in the chat if you prefer to contact me directly. We would love to hear from you and have you be a part of this important work. And on behalf of CCMW, thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you, both Sabrine and Zainab. That was amazing. So, aren't you proud of both of them? Like, I just want to go and embrace you and say thank you. And I am truly very proud of these two young women who've uh, who've been on this journey with us now for several years. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize two other people who made this, this vision come to realization. One of them is Silmi Abdullah. Silmi is here with us, and I want to thank Silmi for doing our feasibility study on establishing a legal clinic, a CCMW legal clinic. And if it hadn't been for Silmi's work that sort of guided the path, for us to actually do all of the things we needed to do in order for us to be a compliant civil society organization to deliver legal services, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you, Silmi. Another person I want to recognize is Firdaus Ali. It was Firdaus who had the vision after our Aspire study, the employment barrier study that we launched, titled Still uh, Overqualified and Underemployed. In the report, Firdaus shared with us that one of the issues facing Muslim women was sexual harassment. And you know, sexual harassment is a very taboo subject anyway, but in our communities, no one ever discusses it, and women suffer in silence. So it was Firdaus who put together a very comprehensive and excellent proposal to Justice Canada, and lo and behold, we were we were approved, and now um, we have Zainab leading that project. So without both of these individuals, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today. I would also be remiss if I didn't recognize that we are also getting funding from the Government of Ontario under their um, Ontario Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. So now we're going to hear from two other remarkable women. They're going to share some of their lived experiences and their knowledge um, about the two topics and the two initiatives that we are launching today. So you will hear from our first speaker, who is Sabah Sajad Hazai. And Sabah has been involved with CCMW for many, many years. She was on our board, but since she left the board, we have engaged with her in many conversations about everything from abuse and, spiritual, psychological, and sexual abuse in our communities, on the sensitive topic of polygamy in our workplaces. And we have been chatting off and on about this particular initiative where we would provide direct services to Muslim women. So Sabah Sajad Hazai is a Muslim Canadian senior lawyer who is dedicated to empowering vulnerable Muslim communities while in navigating the intersections of faith, culture, and Canadian law. A graduate of Osgoode Hall Law School with both a Juris Doctor and a Master of Laws. Through her trauma-informed approach, Sabah Sajad Hazai bridges gaps in legal and social systems, ensuring that Muslim women receive compassionate, faith-sensitive support while upholding their rights under Canadian law. Her leadership in culturally responsive legal advocacy continues to pave the way for safer, more inclusive communities, with a practice focused on protecting Muslim women's rights under Canadian law, gender-based violence, and family law. Sabah addresses systemic barriers through culturally grounded legal support. She assists Canadian Muslim women in receiving legal services that are responsive to their unique needs, including those resulting from complexities related to Canadian and Muslim family laws, in the spirit of fair and equitable access to justice. Sabah established her first law office at a mosque in Mississauga and created a safe space for Muslim women and families to navigate issues like domestic violence, immigration, and child welfare. Her work includes training imams and service providers to improve responses to gender-based violence and strengthen collaboration between Muslim communities and mainstream institutions. She continues to advise national agencies supporting Muslim families in crisis, ensuring access to tailored legal and social services. After Sabah, you will hear from Sania Chaudhry. And Sania is now our legal policy consultant on the WISH project. And she's also not a stranger to CCMW because she received our CCMW and Women Who Inspire award a few years ago. And she's always remained engaged with CCMW on different issues. Sania Chaudhry is a human rights lawyer, workplace investigator, and respectful workplace training facilitator. Her Master's of Law research focused on critical race feminist theory and administrative law in the context of bias, and has delivered many education sessions incorporating this framework to the workplace and human rights. Sania has been active on multiple boards, organizations, and committees, and has spoken and written about equity, diversity, inclusion, and wellness. In 2022, she was recognized as a top 30 under 30 by the Alberta Council of Global Cooperation and the Community Crusader Award by the South Asian Inspiration Awards. In 2023, she received the Rising Star Award by the South Asian Bar Association of Calgary and was named one of 2023's top 25 influential lawyers by Canadian Lawyer magazine in the Changemaker category. So I know that, I mean, we could go on telling you about these two amazing and remarkable women. Again, I'm so proud of Sabah and Sanya. So now I'm going to let Sabah and Sanya speak. Sabah, please, you're first on our roster, so please go ahead. Sorry, did we lose Sabah? Hmm. Oh, there you are, Sabah. You need to unmute.
My apologies. My internet is a little bit, I don't know, glitching up today. Of course it would today, right?
Of
So
course.
apologies. I just had to log back in and bear with me if I get kicked out again. I'll come back in as soon as I can.
So you heard your glorious bio, right?
I
hope.
did. I did. Thank you so much for that. I'm touched. Thank you
Please
so
go
much.
ahead. You're welcome. Go ahead.
Okay, so Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my involvement in this project. I am so excited to be here today and to be a part of this. For over 20 years, I have focused my legal education and practice on serving vulnerable members of diverse Muslim communities. Throughout my career, I have helped more than 1,400 survivors of domestic violence navigate family law issues while overcoming systemic barriers. This is not a number that I'm very proud of. Actually, I've stopped counting because as the years have gone on, the numbers have just continued to rise. I also have extensive experience guiding local community agencies that support Muslim families in crisis, in tackling the complex and challenging social issues that arise while serving the needs of the Muslim community here in Canada. As a lawyer and as an advocate, I often find myself having to unpack the interconnected issues with families in crisis. I help them to assess their circumstances to better navigate the legal system. We unpack the cultural practices and religious misinterpretations to reach a place where we can begin considering options to resolve legal issues, always keeping in mind the objectives of Canadian family law, which are premised on equality, equity, and the best interests of the children. As a young lawyer, I observed that Muslim women were not being treated appropriately, especially survivors of domestic violence, and it concerned me. I remember attending a conference as an articling student that changed the trajectory of my practice. It was a discussion on policing in diverse communities. Politicians, police officers, mainstream service providers, and members of the Muslim community had gathered to talk about domestic violence and the experiences of diverse communities. It struck me that there were no Muslim women represented on that stage of speakers that day, and the best practices being shared were not helpful by any means. In fact, most of the presenters appeared frustrated by their experiences in dealing with diverse communities. The lack of respect and the lack of cultural fluency was glaringly evident. I remember reaching out to prominent community and government leaders, demanding that they improve their responses to supporting Muslim women experiencing violence. Everyone acknowledged the gaps in serving the Muslim community, especially Muslim women, but no one wanted to touch it. I recall one conversation at a local Islamic center in Mississauga, where the leadership challenged me to be part of the solution. They invited me to help Muslim families navigate the legal system directly from the center. I agreed. I took them up on that challenge, and I opened up my first law office, and to the best of my knowledge, the first ever opened in a mosque. I helped to design a collaborative training program with local imams to address domestic violence, with two goals. One, raising awareness of the unique challenges faced by vulnerable members of the Muslim community and highlighting the difficulties that mainstream service providers, social workers, police officers, and frontline responders faced in addressing them. We also worked to build bridges of understanding to facilitate access to necessary social and legal services. With the support of student volunteers, we identified gaps in mental health, newcomer support, child and youth services, senior care, and domestic violence support. And then we connected them with external providers to address these. Looking back at those early years, working with the community to address legal issues and access social services remains one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. The resilience and courage of the Muslim women that I worked with and I witnessed was humbling and it was inspiring. And their tenacity and their faith in the face of adversity left me in awe. This work has led me to proudly embrace my identity as a Muslim woman and what it means to practice Islam here in Canada. Reflecting on my own journey and the experiences of those that I was privileged to support, I continue to study classical Islamic scholarship under qualified scholars, critically engaging with how our rich Islamic scholarship and traditions are intended to shape the identity and the lived experiences of Muslim Canadians. And this pursuit of Islamic knowledge, it sustains me spiritually and it fuels my legal advocacy for Muslim women. As a lawyer, I am responsible for ensuring legal issues are addressed in accordance with Canadian law. Yet Muslim women often navigate patriarchal interpretations of their faith, they endure stigma within their communities, and they struggle with Islamophobia, all while facing limited access to affordable, competent legal services. And this is a very heavy and traumatizing burden. I have witnessed their challenges firsthand. Many lack access to legal services or awareness of their entitlements, forced to navigate legal issues without accurate advice. Their rights to property division, parenting, financial support are compromised by unaffordable services and the impacts of gender-based violence, economic abuse, spiritual abuse, and Islamophobia. Too often, they make critical decisions under the coercion while facing domestic violence, financial manipulation, sometimes homelessness, mental health struggles, and poverty. Coercive control isn't always physical. Many women endure emotional manipulation, spiritual abuse, legal bullying, and gaslighting, their rights distorted and denied. The legal system often overlooks these dynamics, adding to the pressure to accept less than they deserve out of exhaustion, fear, confusion, shame. And we must name these tactics: isolation, surveillance, humiliation, and recognize their harm to empower survivors to make informed decisions. Policymakers, lawmakers, the judiciary, and members of the legal profession must continue to listen actively, carefully, and knowledgeably to survivors to facilitate access to justice. Many women struggle to reconcile their rights with misinterpretations of Islam used to restrict them, lacking access to authentic religious knowledge that supports their empowerment. Advocacy efforts to address their experiences are often dismissed as intrusions, undermining both the sanctity of our legal system and Islamic traditions. Without cultural competency, even well-intentioned initiatives and systems fail. These harms worsen existing social barriers for survivors with intersecting vulnerabilities. Marginalized women face intertwined individual, familial, cultural, and systemic risks. Muslim women need access to authentic Islamic resources to counter those who weaponize their religion. Both the legal system and Muslim communities must also affirm Muslim women's right to determine how faith influences their decisions, free from coercion. Their Muslim identity should never compromise their access to justice. Ensuring full legal rights requires cultural fluency and confronting biases about Muslims. This dynamic exists not only in Muslim spaces, but I've witnessed it in legal offices, courtrooms, and government institutions. So why are Muslim women's needs and experiences not given the respect that they deserve? Based on my experience, this is what I've observed. 1, exclusion from decision making. They are often shut out of spaces where decisions affecting their lives and their rights are made. 2, silenced experiences. Their lived realities, shaped by gender, faith, and their identity, are dismissed or used against them. They're expected to fragment their identities to access support rather than being treated equally and equitably under the law. Systemic barriers. They lack access to legal and support services, their voices underrepresented or ignored. The failure to address these barriers deprives Muslim women of informed legal and Islamic knowledge, undermining their autonomy and quality of life. An overburdened legal system, plagued by delays and biases, leaves them navigating legal trauma without support. Political systems often blame the woman, her choices, and her religion, using her Muslim identity to restrict access, while cultural barriers block mainstream support. And this is unsustainable and it is unacceptable. Muslim women should not have to compromise safety or legal rights because of lack of timely legal advice, inadequate funding for support organizations, legal advice that ignores their lived experiences, and the absence of culturally informed, respected counsel and support. The system is broken and something must change. And that's why I'm proud to be joining CCMW Law. And together, as other presenters have mentioned, we have been asking ourselves this question: how do we provide Canadian Muslim women with access to informed legal advice and culturally competent support? How do we empower them to make confident decisions in safe spaces? And to us, our mission is clear. And that is why I'm excited about the establishment of the Muslim Women's Legal and Community Support Clinic. And here we're endeavoring to, 1, offer a safe environment that honors Muslim women's choices, beliefs, and privacy. 2, provide legal services respectful of faith and lived experience. 3, ensure access to culturally aware support services. 4, deliver competent, tailored guidance. 5, help them make confident legal choices for themselves and their families. 6, improve legal information and system navigation. 7, combat Islamophobia, misogyny, patriarchy, and cultural incompetence. 8, to raise awareness of barriers to competent legal and social support services. And to do this, we need your support to carry out this vision for a legal clinic for Muslim women in Ontario. And we pray that eventually across Canada, inshallah. So please join us by supporting our work, joining our membership, donating your time, getting involved, providing financial support to ensure that we can make this initiative sustainable and increase our capacity to support Muslim women's access to justice, building safe spaces, and responding to the cultural incompetence that is compromising Muslim women's legal rights, dignity, and safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabah. And I just want to mention that we are going to have a Q&A session after Sanya has spoken. So if you would like to add your questions in the chat, you can. I will come to them, by and by. And also, if you would like to ask questions once we're done hearing from Sanya, you can also use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'll call upon you to ask your question. So now over to you, Sanya.
Thank you. Good evening and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for the warm introduction, Nazat, and thank you for your very powerful remarks, Sabah. My name is Sanya. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the legal consultant for the Wish Project. I am really excited to share with you the why behind the Wish Project and why it is needed. As background on myself, I am a racialized Muslim woman and I am a human rights lawyer, workplace investigator, and respectful workplace unconscious bias training facilitator. But I also have a past in immigration and family law. And in all these areas of law and all these types of practice, I've worked in the issue of sexual harassment faced by Muslim women and by women identifying folks in general. Um, always come up, particularly in my work related to workplace law. And my passion for entering into the line of work focused on employment, human rights, and workplace investigations has been from my own experiences with navigating the intersections of my race, my religion, and my gender in a profession that has clear barriers for racialized women and in a profession that has an epidemic of sexual harassment, um, while also the intersecting issue of stigma in my cultural and religious community regarding sexual harassment. Um, so my Master's of Law research really focused on developing an analytical framework that can piece apart oppression. So I kind of combined decolonial theories, critical race feminist theory, and applied it specifically in the context of bias in administrative law, but put together a synthesized theoretical framework that could be applied to other things. Um, and this framework I've found has been helpful in helping me analytically tease apart how sexual harassment manifests differently for Muslim women who are often at the intersections of race, religion, gender, sexuality, migrant status, age, education, precarious employment, and many other factors. There has been little investigation on the specific needs and knowledge gaps of Muslim women experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace, given how Islamophobia can act as a form of gender based violence, and the intersectional experience of how sexual harassment manifests differently for Muslim women. There's different cultural manifestations, and there's different, patterns for reporting and things like that. Um, and so there's also a cultural aspect to how sexual harassment manifests for Muslim women. And then on the other end, in my experience, small to medium sized employers are also unaware and often unprepared on how to deal with sexual harassment in the workplace and their legal obligations in general as, a standing thing, but also, not understanding how sexual harassment can manifest differently for Muslim women. There are many barriers to access to justice for sexual harassment. I'm just going to talk about a few. So, one is that lack of knowledge I was talking about. So, lack of knowledge both on the part of employees and employers on really what is sexual harassment, legally speaking. What is sexual harassment? And if we go into the legal definition, sexual harassment goes beyond conduct of a physical nature. So, it includes remarks, it includes things that are, you know creating a sexual environment in the workplace. So it's quite broader than what we um, traditionally think of. So for me, often in my prior practice, I've had women clients come in and, describe what they experienced in their workplace to me, and they haven't named it as sexual harassment when it actually does fall in the legal definition of sexual harassment. I've had many times where I've squared off against opposing counsel who do not believe that their client, so the employer, has left sexual harassment unaddressed because even opposing counsel is using a narrow definition of sexual harassment that is actually not in line with the case law that exists. I've advised employers dealing with problems in the workplace, with these employers often being well meaning, but just not realizing that certain conduct is legally sexual harassment, and also not realizing their duties as an employer on dealing with sexual harassment when it becomes reported in the workplace, but also to proactively prevent it from happening. So that's the first barrier. Another barrier is a lack of trauma-informed investigations done into sexual harassment, and I would add to this also lack of culturally competent investigations. So often there will be a report of sexual harassment made by a Muslim woman, and the employer will decide to investigate and appoint an investigator. And often what happens is there are outdated methods being used to assess the credibility of these women. So there's research out there on, sexual assault myths, and most investigators are aware of those, and they even make mention of, being cognizant of those. But research also shows that bias, so unconscious bias, seeps into credibility judgments because we all have unconscious bias, right? So we all have mental shortcuts in our brain that help us filter information, and unconsciously, the stereotypes we grow up with, that we see in the media, that we see in our institutions, become socialized into these structures and become the filters that we use to filter information. And a credibility judgment, what that is, an investigator assessing how believable someone's testimony on a matter is. And there are other ways to assess it, such as looking at corroborating evidence and other things like that. But when things like demeanor are relied on, um, it is very common for subjective assessments to come in that are not actually, grounded in the direct evidence. There's research by multiple legal scholars on things like how the identity of, a person making a decision impacts what they decide in a legal matter. There's research on how, administrative decision makers, like investigators, or like even tribunal members and judges that are dealing with uh, people from diverse backgrounds, how their gaps in lived experience with the community that is presenting before them leads to judgments of credibility that are, skewed because they just don't understand things like, different cultural manifestations of someone, giving an honest testimony. Someone not making eye contact becomes, oh, this person is evasive in demeanor, and not taking into account cultural things that could prevent that someone from, making direct eye contact. And then there's tons of research out there on things like, how decision makers will interrupt folks in their testimony more often when they're from racialized groups, and have, more negative toned questions. And really, we all have bias, and the way to deal with it is, focusing on really that it's a real thing and being self-aware of it. And also by educating, the legal system in general, and also employers on how, you know, cultural aspects come to play, and how intersectionality comes to play as well. Um, in terms of Muslim women, understanding cultural ways Muslim women experience sexual harassment and the unique barriers they face, and how this intersects with Islamophobia as well. Um, so again, my anti-oppression framework kind of synthesized how oppression happens and gives a kind of a helpful way to look at this. So one is, you know, keeping in mind always that oppression is ordinary and daily, and it always happens. So, Islamophobia, gender Islamophobia is always happening. Keeping in mind that there is structural privilege in society. People, there is a hierarchy in society, and people have differing levels of privilege and disadvantage on the basis of structures. And then also, attuning ourselves to race, to religion, to gender, to see how these factors are underpinning oppression. And some methods from this theoretical framework that are useful is, one is genealogy, which is really a method of counter storytelling. So looking at a set of facts and thinking, what is the perspective, what is the story from the person that is not central in terms of dominance in this experience. So from the party that's being oppressed. So, you don't miss gaps in positionality, keeping in mind of intersectionality, and not just the multiple identity factors that come to play when women are facing sexual harassment, but also the underlying historical systems that underlie, each of those identity groups. So say I'm, a racialized Muslim woman with a disability. What are those historical systems that are underlying all my different points of identity, and in turn impacting my experience of sexual harassment? And then the other helpful method is materialism. So looking at how race functions as a form of power and property in the labor market and in the workplace. And we can use all of that to expand our cultural understanding. Another barrier that I've seen is that the legal framework for sexual harassment has many laws all over the place that can apply. So there's different laws in each province with similar themes, but different laws. And even within provinces and, federally for federally regulated workplaces. There's multiple types of laws addressing sexual harassment in the workplace as a different type of thing in each type of law. So it could be discrimination, it could be a workplace injury, it could be a workplace hazard, it could be many things, or it could just be sexual harassment. And so people, and often even lawyers, are left wondering, where does this incident of sexual harassment fit? And the answer is not that easy. It can fit everywhere, but there are often legal consequences for sometimes pursuing one, legal avenue over another, or settling one type of claim leading you to not be able to settle other types of claims, or maybe not thinking of attacking it from all angles and then realizing that might not be the best strategy. So really, there needs to be a culturally competent and also legally nuanced assessment of sexual harassment cases in terms of figuring out what's the strategy to, address this situation. Another barrier is, of course, confusion with criminal laws. This comes up all the time, where folks, either the person being investigated, who the complaint is against, or even the employer, or even, the person who experienced sexual harassment, applying a different standard to the sexual harassment. So, in criminal law, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, but really in the workplace, it's a much lower burden of proof. There's a much lower evidentiary threshold. It's just more likely than not, on a balance of probabilities, did this happen? The legal test is also different in the workplace versus criminal laws. The legal test in the workplace really focuses on the reasonable person and not really the intent of the abuser. And then there's, several other barriers, right? There's language barriers into, accessing really what the law is and what your employer's policies are. There's religious and cultural stigma barriers, about fear about your family finding out, the community, internalization of stigma and blaming yourself, again, because of how privilege is structural and bias is structural. So even we have bias, like, for instance, research shows the implicit association test when taken by women shows that 80% of women are biased against women. And so you have potentially an internal bias where that is preventing you from recognizing that something wrong has happened here. There's also barriers for newcomer and racialized women, as well as a distrust of the legal system, fear of an adversarial process where you might have to square off against your opposer, and again, in the workplace, against your abuser. But again, in the workplace, it isn't like that. So you don't actually, sit, face to face and face off. There are other legal avenues to report sexual harassment and, get a safe workplace. Another barrier is job precariousness. So, fear of losing your employment or being in a situation where the employment is exploitative to begin with. Another barrier also is workplace culture. So there's some industries where folks are socialized to think that they have to tolerate some amount of sexual harassment as part of the job, which again is not true, legally speaking. There's, as I mentioned earlier, employer lack of knowledge and resources. So a lot of the time, employers will assume when there's a report of sexual harassment that it's none of their business and it's just like a criminal matter and not a workplace matter. And so they don't realize what their duties are because they have legal duties. And then, how it often intertwines with discrimination. And then, as Saba had mentioned, limits of funding, access to lawyers, the legal system being colonial and biased to, start off with. And so with all these barriers, as Zainab has explained, the WISH project aims to assess the knowledge of legal rights, obligations, and remedies for sexual harassment in the workplace from the perspective of Muslim women employees and the perspective of small to medium-sized employers, and then to use that to develop training, written materials, and modules to address these knowledge gaps. And a critical part of this is surveys that we will be doing. So surveys of Muslim women, and then later also surveys of small to medium-sized employers. And really the purpose of these surveys is to assess what the knowledge gaps are and what the needs for resources are. And these are anonymous. There's no questions about your lived experience. And really, you can exit at any time, skip questions, all of that. And really the purpose is so that we can develop meaningful resources that can actually help address these knowledge gaps and address, these needs. There will also be an opportunity if folks are interested for focus groups or one-on-one interviews or, providing an anonymous written account. It the survey will have, an option at the end that will lead you to a different link where if you so wish, you can choose to participate in those. And these surveys are really, really important. It is really important, again, also in critical oppression theories to ground legal advocacy, ground resources, ground the legal system, and ground, research in the actual lived experiences of groups that are being oppressed. And so if we want to enhance the legal awareness and provide tailored resources for Muslim women and equip small and medium-sized organizations and employers with, the tools needed to create safer and more inclusive work environments, we have to start at, what the actual knowledge is and how of how sexual harassment manifests in the workplace, what the knowledge is of what sexual harassment is, what laws apply, what are the rights of Muslim women, what are the obligations of employers, all of that. And then this will allow us to equip folks with the legal knowledge and strategies to counter workplace harassment, as well as equip employers as well in terms of enhancing their capacity to deal with sexual harassment and knowing again what their duties are. So I would really, really encourage folks to keep an eye out for the surveys and fill them out. Um, and if you have any questions about it, I can put my email in the chat as well, and we can discuss offline. But in terms of your participation in the survey, if you have any concerns about that, I'm happy to alleviate those concerns as well. But they're a key first step, so please do fill them out. This will help us, recognize and counter workplace sexual harassment as Muslim women, while also holding employers accountable for creating safer work environments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Both Sabah and Sanya provided lots of insight, and as you can all tell, they have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of experience working in these areas that they shared with us. So now we are happy to take questions. If you would like to, you could also put questions in the chat. Um, or you can raise your hands and I will call on you. Hopefully, I can see you or see your hand up if you do. Anyone want to proceed? We see some comments also in the chat. Who can I contact to get involved, Mariam? Um, just contact us, as Sabrine mentioned, for the CCMW Law Project. You can contact Mariam, or I mean not Mariam, sorry, contact Sabrine and the rest of the team at law@ccmw.com. And for the Wish Project, you can get in touch with Zainab. So we put some contact emails in the chat. Thanks, Sabrine. Dara, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. So firstly, I want to say I'm so inspired today. You guys are amazing. And thank you for all the work that you do. My question is to Sanya, and I apologize if I said it correctly. Okay. I'm just curious if you can please elaborate on, you mentioned that research has kind of had findings that allude to that there is bias within kind of women and how they also perceive it. I'm just curious if you can elaborate as to, has there been any inquiry as to why, where it roots from? Just to elaborate on that point.
For sure, I'm happy to. So what the, kind of theoretical thoughts around that, as well as cognitive research around that, is that unconscious bias is really structural. So what happens is that even for folks that are racialized, even for folks that are women, or, from a historically marginalized group, we're still exposed to society. And we're still exposed to, the media, institutions, lots of colonial systems. And what happens is, again, this is unconscious, so we're not doing it on purpose, but our brain, the way our brains are wired is that we get so much information at all times. We're just getting it all the time, that our brain automatically creates these filters and shortcuts to organize information. And in that doing that, it actually filters in stereotypes. So there's several biases that it filters in. So one is affinity bias, where we unconsciously will, for instance, judge the testimony of someone that's similar to us more positively, but then at the same time, there's representativeness bias, which is the actual uh, stereotypes. So representativeness bias is when we look at someone and we judge them based on their similarity to a larger group in society. So for instance, if you have a witness, like a accused lineup, and someone has to choose someone as like who did the robbery, they're more likely to choose, oh, okay, racialized person, criminal. And that's just their brain automatically, racialized person, criminal. There's also confirmation bias. So again, if society is telling us, for instance, that women fabricate reports of sexual harassment, we're more likely to have that hypothesis unconsciously in our mind and then do things to confirm that hypothesis. For instance, when we're weighing the evidence or when we're taking the testimony of the woman. And so really it's not an intentional thing, which is why that happens. There's an interesting study, not in the context of women, but there's an interesting study on uh, racialized writers and so racialized lawyers, and they write a memo. And so what it is it's called a written in white and black study, I think. And it has senior lawyers, and what they did with the senior lawyers is they had them assess a written legal memorandum. And the only variable they changed was the race of the writer. So everything else was the same. Um, Even the racialized lawyers, so the racialized senior lawyers, even women senior lawyers, all senior lawyers were more likely to show a pattern of finding more errors and giving more negative feedback to the writer that was Black. And that's controlling for other factors, the way scientists do. And so that really shows you that it's structural. And, there's also lots of research out there on internalization of stigma, so self-stigmatizing based on kind of your racial, gendered identities. And with women as well, we're socialized to take into account other people's context a lot, which leads to often not addressing our own needs. And so all those things all together are at play.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question, but maybe I'll pause in case there are other questions.
So, okay, we'll come back to you, Dara. Are there any other questions? There were lots of questions actually in the chat. So people were asking if the recording will be available. Yes, it will be. All our sessions, unless otherwise stated, are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. So once we're done, in the next little while, you'll find it on our YouTube channel. Another question that was asked was, whether our legal services that now Sabah is providing. She's providing direct legal services to Muslim women in need here in Ontario, and those services are free. So, I mean, it's mashallah, it's an amazing thing that has happened that for the first time, Muslim women, and there are other services that are available for Muslims, but this is specifically to meet the needs of Muslim women who are sometimes misguided, when they go to other places about what their rights are. So we're really happy we can do that. Khadija, go ahead.
Hi, so my camera's not working and I have a bit of a cold. So I work in crisis counseling with gender-based violence and rape, and from my aspect, whichever color, forget all the racialized population, there's a lot of barriers even leading to complaint, whether the police even listens to you in the first place, whether it's workplace, house, family, whatever you want, whether it's sexual harassment. Cops will actually, when you're calling, they'll say, "What happened? Oh, that is not sexual harassment. That somebody just teased you. It's not a criminal." So the violence aspect or the sexual harassment aspect, I think, is not clear enough. And I am trying to see how we can use creative measures for education As well as you mentioned there is legal services, but what about court support services? Here we're talking about biases within women's group, but what about if the mentality becomes, and I personally have not faced that type of bias within our own community. I feel there's more of a sisterhood. And I think that is a proactive measure of the hand holding, because the stigma, you're going to complain about somebody within your workplace. The next HR is going to get at you. You face a lot of harassment after you've done the complaint. So how do you go around working in that same environment? You're more like a whistleblower and all that. And then coming back home, you just maybe lost your job. And how will you handle the next employment? Because you're out there, you publicize this whole thing that she's trouble. So how do you kind of address all those issues? And is there any kind of legal protection or anonymity? And should we be anonymous or not? So that's part of my confusion, because I notice a lot of those issues coming up with I survivors. I don't like the word clients, so survivors. So sorry if it's too long-winded.
Oh, thank you, Khadija. So I'm going to let Sanya and Saba answer the questions. So whoever
Yeah.
wants to go first.
I can, take a first try at it. So in terms of sexual harassment in the workplace and reports in the workplace, there are legal principles that require the employer to keep the investigation confidential. So it shouldn't be spreading throughout the workplace. But, from my experience, I can say it happens. It still happens. And really the only, legal consequence for the folks that are spreading it within the workplace is to find them in breach of another workplace policy and do another investigation into their conduct and perhaps terminate them if it's serious enough. And so that is definitely, again, there is a legal protection there in terms of it has to be confidential. But, the practical experience of it is different. There's also legal protection there. There's in several pieces of legislation, there's provisions about preventing the employer from retaliating against a person that makes a report of workplace harassment, including sexual harassment. And so the law actually says, for instance, if someone has reported sexual harassment, you can't go fire them for it. You can't demote them for it. You can't treat them negatively for it. In my practical experience, when I was representing women, that still happens. And really how we deal with it is holding the employer accountable, sending them, a big letter about, here are all the things you've violated. We will take you to court if you don't, do X, Y, Z. Right? But it still doesn't repair the harm. And that's what I mean about the legal system being quite colonial. You can get a settlement. You can, get a policy change even in your workplace, but it doesn't take away the fact that you were harmed and, you were retaliated against and all of this. And then in terms of sexual harassment and recognizing it, that is a problem even amongst lawyers. That is a problem even amongst tribunals and court system. And like you mentioned, police officers, in the workplace everywhere, folks don't realize something is sexual harassment. Oh, it's just teasing. Oh, that person just expressed interest in you. Oh, you're being too sensitive. And in terms of what I said in terms of self stigma, really what that is not being biased. Like bias is a heavy term, but it's more like judging yourself and thinking, okay, this horrible thing happened to me, but am I to blame? Like, did I make this happen? And, for as a person who has experienced it in the workplace, I remember going through all those things, despite being a lawyer, despite, all the things I, talk about and do, going through that thought process of, oh my goodness, like, this must be my fault. This must be the reason why this is happening, right? And so there's that blaming of oneself, and then there's all the systemic barriers, and then lack of understanding of the definition and laws existing, but practically not amounting to much at sometimes. But you can make a workplace safer though, by challenging things when it happens and being resilient with it. But it is a very painful process, I agree. Yeah.
Right. Saba, did you want to say anything about the, court support? I mean, we're not handling
Sure.
those cases. We are working, but if it's a gender-based violence issue, yes. Go ahead, Saba.
So Khadija, thank you for your question. I think from what I heard, I think I heard you say, are you working in victim support services at the moment?
No, I'm doing crisis counseling, but that's my next step to work with
Okay,
support.
okay. I think you raised
It's
some very,
emotional support.
right. You raised some very practical practical realities, and that is that unfortunately, we have the ideal principles of a legal system that we would like to achieve, but at the end of the day, we also have the human aspect and the human experience, which means that that women, when they do speak up, they face consequences. I don't think that's news to anybody that's here. Well, one of the things that you said that I wanted to comment on, and I think it was a very important comment so thank you for making it, because this also happens in family law, is that there is an intersection between criminal and family law matters. And when that happens, the challenges that I've experienced with my clients is getting the acknowledgement of, or getting police officers to actually address that domestic violence has occurred, and to actually lay charges. And then there's another challenge to that, and I don't want to get into that because we can just keep going on with it. But the reality is that, when an individual is charged and he or she, because, we have a mandatory, we're supposed to have a mandatory charge for domestic violence response. But the reality of that is that when somebody is charged, there are financial repercussions to that as well. So it's very like, the idea is that what we're trying to do here at the CCMW Law Clinic is to take all of that information and provide it to the client so that the client can make an informed decision about what they want to do. So that they, have a safe space where they can actually think about, what is happening to me? Why is this happening? How is me speaking up about it? How am I supposed to navigate this? Because we have to consider that there are children involved. There are practical realities of bills involved. Like, how do we do this? Like, how do we make this work in a way without taking away the client's autonomy? That's the principles guiding the work that I have done in my practice, and now that I've joined CCMW Law as their legal counsel. But again, for me, it's about the client makes the decision, we provide the information, and if we can provide that information early, that's an early intervention, I think. And with respect to your question about whether we provide those services, my first comment on that is that Muslim women are also entitled to the same social services that other women are. And the first approach for me would be to ensure that they're getting that support from the government funded agencies that are there to actually support them. And if they're not going to be getting that, then the next step is to advocate for them. And if we have to make ourselves present, we will do so to the extent of our capacity.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. So there were a few questions in the chat, but I'll come back to you, Dara, after that. So some folks asked about services in other provinces, and rightly, Sabrina answered that. We still coordinate legal services and gender-based violence supports for women in other provinces and territories. Our long-term vision is to replicate what we're doing here in Ontario, but it all depends on funding and demand and what we can actually do. But, one thing we want to make you aware of is that this is a pilot, and the good thing about a pilot is you can document, volume, the issues that we're dealing with, whether or not the clinic is actually being used. Are we really helping the women? Are they satisfied with the services we're providing? Is the education we're providing helpful? So the pilot is 2 years long, and with the documentation and our experience, hopefully we can scale it up and move to other provinces depending on demand and funding. But that's our long-term vision, inshallah. So back to Dara.
Yes, thank you. So, two questions. I'll keep it brief. One is, what is the number one thing that you would say? Because you mentioned that there is misinterpretation within Islamic law. So, what is the number one most common misinterpreted thing in your experience you've come across? And the second is, in the context of an employer workplace, if sexual harassment is reported and the employer retaliates, what are kind of the best steps to take in this situation?
So first question for Sabah about the, most common issues that arise in Muslim family law and what we have seen. at CCMW and also Sabah in your practice?
So Dara, thank you. That's a very thoughtful question that you've asked. And the first one, the most that I see the most frequently is the responses around domestic violence, and how a woman should handle it, how she should, there is a lot of information shared with women that unfortunately impacts their safety, which is about, a lot of times Muslim women and my clients that I've seen will go into our Muslim spaces and they will ask for information about, having experienced domestic violence. And they're given very inconsistent advice with respect to how, so instead of, I would say like the best way, well, how do I say this? Is like instead of being given the appropriate advice and resources and support that's available, they're given information about how they should consider enduring it, right? And how, maybe they should try to work it out. I've heard some really wild and unacceptable things. I don't think we have enough time to get into those. But I think that, like, for me, Islamic knowledge, I think for Muslim women, it's something to be reclaimed, that we have a right to, and that was actually meant for us as well. And I think that's not going to come from asking. I think we have to start going into spaces where there's more Muslim women that are actually like thinking and talking about Islam, and actually connecting to it and learning more about it. So that's one. The other one is polygamy, about how many wives can a man have and under what circumstances? How does that work? So that's another one. And as everyone I'm sure everybody here knows that that's illegal here in Canada. And yeah, so those are the two that I see highlighted a lot about accepting and enduring violence. And yeah, we have a long way to go with educating our communities about family violence and the impact that it has on the woman, and that it has on the family unit, and then what that does to our Muslim communities. So that's something that we're struggling with, and I think it's going to take continued work and people thinking about, what do we do? What do we do about this? And for me, like honestly, it comes back to the more knowledge that we can equip ourselves with and share, and more safe spaces that we can create for women. That's the path.
Yeah. I know there's others, like for instance, people not wanting to register their marriage and the pitfalls that can arise if you don't, um, because they've had a religious ceremony and it's not registered and they're okay with that, and then they can have another marriage. I mean, it's quite interesting. And the other one is instant talaq, instant divorce. It happens. And the women don't know what to do because they know that's not how divorce works here. Um, so there's some interesting things that
Yeah.
we've encountered. So,
And
but
I would add to that one more thing, one other one that I see that continues to concern me is the meher, the nikah contract, and the level of either it's not being given, either it's not being properly articulated, or it's being used as a way to either complicate a woman's family law rights here in Ontario, and things like that. So yeah.
yeah, there's a lot, Tara. I mean, that's why I don't know if you've seen our booklets on Muslim and Canadian family laws. On the key issues in family law, we have provided a comparison at a summary level. We don't go into a lot of detail, but it's really useful information. It's not advice, it's information to help women understand the differences between the two systems of law. Sanya, the second question was directed at you.
Yes. So there's several, like I said, there's so many multiple laws surrounding sexual harassment. So there's actually many different legal avenues that you can pursue, and sometimes folks will pursue all of them or some of them. Um, so the first, if your employer has retaliated against you for reporting sexual harassment, is actually a discrimination complaint. So, different provinces, as well as, federally regulated organizations are subject to different human rights acts and codes. You can do a discrimination complaint because it would be discrimination on the basis of sex and then retaliation for reporting that form of discrimination. Um, and then, there's also under OHS, so sorry, occupational health and safety and workers' compensation legislation and things like that, in again, all the different provinces and in kind of the federal realm that prevent retaliation, and you can make a complaint to the relevant occupational health and safety or workers' compensation body about retaliation from your employer. So, for instance, in BC, it's called a prohibited action complaint. In Alberta, it's called a disciplinary action complaint. Like, there's different names for it, but really, these are to report that the employer has retaliated against you. So there are different legal avenues, definitely, that are out there. Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
there was a comment about like how do you even recognize or document workplace sexual harassment if there are no witnesses and video and audio taping? Um, so I mean, would it be considered like how would this work? So the
Mhm.
question, how do you even document workplace sexual harassment if there are no witnesses and video and audio taping is also considered illegal?
Yeah, so the good positive thing is that often in investigations or even in hearings, they don't need documentary evidence of the workplace sexual harassment, and it's more of an exercise of weighing a person's testimony and how, again, credible or believable it is, considering the entire context as compared to, the abuser's testimony. But one piece of advice that I have for folks is to keep good notes because the way trauma operates is that we often will forget the chronology of things, or sometimes a traumatic response can be flashbulb memories where we just have like we remember one vivid part of it and not everything else. And increasingly, investigators and the legal system are being cognizant of the fact that trauma impacts memory, and so are not using that against folks that are testifying as survivors. But it's still good to keep notes, especially in the workplace context. If someone keeps doing something, keeping a note on this date, he did it again. On this date, this happened. These were the words that were used. Um, Witness testimony, even if witnesses are not there witnessing what happened, witnesses can often speak to tertiary things that can corroborate a person's report about sexual harassment. So they might be able to comment about the power imbalance and how, the parties interact in meetings or things like that. So that could be used as kind of like circumstantial evidence that can corroborate the entirety of what the complainant is saying. So there's different things that you can do. And sometimes it's again just an exercise of, he said, she said.
Yeah. Sanya, is it reasonable to say that when someone, is harassing when they're committing sexual harassment, chances are that, their victim is not a single person, like they've
Yeah.
done this before, or they have a
Yeah.
recurring kind of behavior that it may manifest itself in different ways. Either they tell jokes, inappropriate jokes, or they post photos in their workstation that are
Yeah.
inappropriate,
Yeah.
or they'll talk about sexual things. So, um, yeah, so I mean, there's different kind of signals,
Yeah.
um, and people talk about it. They say, oh yeah, so and so says this, and
Exactly.
he makes me feel really weird or uncomfortable.
Exactly. And as an investigator, we're looking usually for those little pieces. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I just wanted, Homa mentioned our booklets. So, we have these those booklets on family law topics, comparing Muslim and Canadian family laws. We are going to, one of the objectives of CCMW Law is to review and update those booklets and publish them, republish them. So watch for our, announcements about that. And then also we're going to be offering workshops again. We did that 5 years ago. So we know some laws have changed in some provinces. And then also in the Muslim world, so many things are illegal in the Muslim majority countries, like polygamy, and there are certain, conditions if it does happen, but nobody pays any attention to that. So we're surveying, we're looking at what the reality is in those Muslim majority countries on these, certain things, and we'll update our resources, and then we'll certainly provide the workshops. And so, I think we have our work cut out for us, and we wouldn't be here if everything was fine. It isn't. And our objective is to make Muslim women's lives easier, make it easier for them to recapture their rights, to understand what their rights are in their faith, and have agency and be empowered to move on in their lives. You can never ever neglect the trauma that is involved, in any of these things. So you have to center what we're doing, you know, the women have to be at the center, and their experiences, lived experiences, valued. Um, and that's why we're here. We wouldn't be here otherwise. So, if there are no more questions, I'm going to, well, I'm going to thank everybody who came. I'm going to thank our speakers. So we started with Sabrina Azrak and Zainab Jamal, and of course Saba and Sania, their powerful testimonials, their experiences. And you know what? I can tell that we're off to a very good start because we have, when you think about brain power and lived experience, we've got plenty to share. So I really, want to thank you all for presenting, and also to all of you for attending. Nina, I see you have a thumbs up there. I was actually going to call you and ask you if you could do a closing prayer, dua for us, because you do such a beautiful job. I know that I'm putting you on the spot, but I know you've been listening intently, and I do want to close with something that will help, heal after listening to some really difficult things. So may I do that, my dear Nina?
Sure,
Please.
sure. Thank you so much, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya Allah, please bless all the women that are doing their best in trying to aid their fellow Muslim women to come to their support, to help them navigate this difficult legal system. It isn't easy, even with all the education behind you, and even if English is your first language, and even if you have a family that supports you. We all know that this is very challenging. So we thank Allah for the opportunity to be able to establish a clinic like this. Inshallah, it's going to be successful with all the hard work and guidance of our amazing legal team, our volunteers, our staff, and of course, our community support. Please, Allah, guide us, help us all to do what's best and to raise each other up and to encourage each other and stand for each other and be each other's voices for those that have a difficulty speaking. And Ya Allah, guide us always to do what's best. And please, Allah, accept all of our good deeds, our intentions, and help us to make a positive difference in the world, in all of our communities, for all women. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين آمين. Thank you. Boy, I could listen to all of you speak for hours. Fascinating, mashallah. May God bless your brains and keep you all steadfast and strong and patient, inshallah.
I mean, thank you.